I'm delighted to be participating in today's conference that marks the important work that's been done for many years now by the World Development Movement. And today's conference, Take Back Our World, is about strengthening the work that the organisation has done with its activists and its members, and also the work of the global social movements that it's part of as it relaunches itself as global justice now. It's fantastic to see such a big audience. We've got a lot of people in the room, so we had a few issues just making sure that the room's safe for us to go ahead in the next hour and a half. My name's Emma Dowling, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour and a half and for our conversation with Paul Mason. Now, obviously, Paul Mason is somebody who doesn't need much of an introduction, but I am going to say a few words anyway. Paul's reporting on the crisis of global capitalism is exceptionally perceptive, I'd say, and also his concern for social justice. He's an astute analyst and commentator, and he always seems to be as comfortable reporting from the studio as he does from the streets, and we also now know from the Northern Soul dancehall. He has a passionate intellect that covers a dizzying array of topics across culture, technology, politics, economics and society. And as you well know, he's currently economics editor at Channel 4 News, and he's also the author of several books: Live Working, Die Fighting, How the Working Class Went Global, and Meltdown, The End of the Age of Greed, and also Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere, The New Global Revolutions. He tweets it at Paul Mason News, and you can find his blog via the Channel 4 website. Now, this morning is not just about why it's kicking off everywhere, but why it keeps on kicking off everywhere. We want to look at the recent protests and events that have arisen since the global economic crisis in 2008. And we want to look at where we are now in 2015, 7 years later. Has there been a recovery, and if so, what does this recovery look like? What is the current state of the global economy right now, and where is capitalism headed? What's happening in different parts of the world, and how do the situations and events in different parts of the world link together? Indeed, what's happening in Europe, and where might things be headed in light of events such as the recent electoral success of the left-wing anti-austerity party Syriza in Greece, but also the rise of, for example, Podemos in Spain? And what openings are there for real change in Europe and across the globe? And what role do social movements for global justice play? So in the first part of this morning, I'm going to pose a few questions to Paul to get us started. And then in the second half, I'll open the floor up to you, for you to put your comments and your questions to Paul. So why it keeps on kicking off everywhere, obviously this is a reference to your last book, Paul, and the unrest of 2011 that you covered. You took us from London to Cairo, from Manila to Athens, all the way to the US, to Russia and to Spain. You took us to the squares and streets across the globe where people have been rising up to remove authoritarian regimes, refuse austerity, and demand freedom and social justice. And I like the way you say you combine reportage, essay, tweet, anecdote, and cyber psychology with your economic insights, as you say, gathered amid clouds of tear gas. You gave us your thoughts on how society might be changing, and you connected the different nodes of unrest. You offered us an explanation of what might have prompted these struggles, how they were organized, and where they might be headed. You pointed to three main factors in the book, I think. One of them was the failures of free market capitalism. The other was the specifics of the technological innovations that you saw. But also, for you, what you thought was important was the individual's desire for freedom as something that was also motivating these struggles. You pointed to the anger and outrage that people felt, and neoliberalism's broken promise of prosperity, rising debt, but also, like I said, the significance of technological innovation. Changing ways, perhaps, of how we live, how we understand who we are and our sense of self. But also that these technologies actually manage to spread the struggle and spread protests in a new way across global networks. You had these two social archetypes, the graduate without a future and the networked individual. But you also pointed to the rise of a new middle class in various places, whereas in others, a sort of demise of the middle class. So a sort of tension going on there. And of course, since the book has been published in 2012 and revised edition in 2013, there have been more protests in Turkey, Brazil, Hong Kong, Thailand, what's happened in Ukraine. And after the Gezi Park protests in Istanbul, I was quite interested to see that you thought that was a turning point, perhaps, that something new was happening, that countries like Turkey or the BRIC countries were experiencing unrest when they were supposed to have been the beneficiaries of globalization and marketization. So you suggested that we had another social archetype join for our analysis, and this was the masked guy with gym membership who hates corruption. So could you talk to us a little bit about your analysis in the book? What continuities do you see since the book was published, and what can recent events tell us about what's been happening across the world?
Well,
there you go.
That was I'm glad you did that. Amazing synopsis. And apologies to everybody who's only seeing my back. I will try and remember you're there. Thank you for that, because my head is, I literally have just got off a Eurostar. I've just been in Brussels, as you may have seen, for the Greek deal. And my head really at the moment is in the current phase, which I think we'll get to talk about, of what is happening to the radicalisation that began. But in order to do it justice, let's go back, as you did just then, to what happened and what I wrote about. I think the best way of putting it, to try and dramatise it for this audience, which incidentally, I just want to say welcome, of course, thank you to you for coming. You are younger and more diverse than the average meeting of this size of Syriza. It's an interesting point. Syriza tends to be me and my grey-haired mates at the frontier. That's what they tends to look like, with some 30-something. This is very different, so it's good. Right, let me talk to you about what happened. When I wrote this book, Live Working or Die Fighting, I realised we were in a new period of upswing, what I thought was kind of an upswing of capitalism. Technological upswing, very clearly, combined with a boom, okay, which had also coincided with a big shift of production to the global south. And so I thought, right, that probably means a new working class in the global south is going to go through exactly the same or very similar formation struggles as my ancestors in Lancashire did in the 1820s and the Peterloo era. Now, I went and found them and talked to them, and it was true. Unions in China, unions in Kenya, obviously NGOs and development NGOs also working with them. But one thing just kept coming back to me, and that was, I can remember an Indian cotton work leader saying to me, Paul, the problem is that we can only organise the old sectors and the old working class. And I said, well, what's the problem with the new working class? He said, they don't think like Marxists anymore. The Indian unions are all led by Marxist trade unions. They just don't think in the old way. And that was one of the first inklings I had that put in my mind that in fact my scenario might be wrong. That the most important thing about what we're going through, probably the second or third most important thing, is the rise of a global working class, which is mainly not white, mainly female, mainly in the global south. That's an amazing fact. If, like me, you grew up in an era where 500 million working class people in the world were mainly white, mainly European and American, and mainly male, and their traditions were incredibly male. But I'd say the more important thing is what we then discovered after 10 years of this relentless technological change was, during this upsurge in 2011, came together what you said, but I'll just say it myself again. It is economic crisis combined with the technological means to combine and do stuff. How does Clay Shirky put it? The cost of doing things, of organising things, is dramatically shrunk down. And you can organise, come together, swarm, achieve an objective, and then go away. Whereas people from my generation, who wanted to do something, say solidarity with the miners in South Africa, you put a resolution to your NUT branch, then it goes to region, then it goes to nation, then they fax something to the miners' union in South Africa, and it goes down a bit, and down a bit, and down a bit. By the time I've told that story to anybody under 30, they're usually laughing, because they don't understand why you would do that. Why wouldn't you just like ring them up, or text them, or form a little Google hangout with them? No, because none of that existed. But why wouldn't we have done? Because to achieve anything, you did need your union to do it. And you did need, the miners in South Africa needed a union, and of course still need a union. But we are now in an era where, as well as that, just as much as, you know, we inhabit Victorian buildings, but we are modern people, we inhabit this world of structures and hierarchies, but there is also grown, I would argue very rapidly, a world of non-structure and non-hierarchy, which allows us to achieve things through struggle that we could not achieve before, and opens up a whole century, probably, of different experience of resistance. So that's the first thing. Next, so economic crisis is a given, we'll talk about it, but so the technological thing is there, but then what is the... I am a historical materialist. I think, as I attempt to think, using the same analytical methods that Marx and his followers used. That doesn't necessarily mean that I want to say that I am a Marxist, but I am a materialist. And one of the memes of Marxism was, being determines consciousness. Social being determines consciousness of the way you exist in society. I think that's true. I've just written an essay called WTF is Eleni Haifa. And it's an essay about the self in the modern world. And what I argue is that if your being begins and ends with 2 iPhones in front of you, and you're texted on both, what, 2 iPhones, for me it's the visual symbol, a lot of people have got this, iPhone and BlackBerry, boyfriend 1, boyfriend 2, sexuality 1, sexuality 2, work, home, etc. And some people have more than that. We are in a world of the multiple self, the multipolar self, and what that self can do, it's weak at doing some things that our dads were good at. It's weak at solidarity. But it's very good at being outraged when its freedom and individual ability to act is compressed. Manuel Castells, the theorist from Barcelona, puts it like this. He says, look, the selves and networks we assembled on the internet before 2011, faced with acute social crisis, to the reality. All that an Occupy camp is a social network turned into physical space. That's why it's temporary. That's why it's scratchy, i.e. difficult, dangerous, uncomfortable, rejects hierarchies, is constantly reformed and reformed in a way that annoys and confuses people from the hierarchical world, like me. But that's what so that's my essential thesis about the relationship of technology to people in the struggles that then happen.
So, in terms of technology, then, what you say that there was something that happened in 2011 that had to do with why people rose up, but you also said that something happened after that in 2013 that moved things perhaps in a different direction or had a different quality. Could you perhaps say something about that?
Yeah. Okay. So a good example would be, you know, 2 countries that are not far off each other. So Greece and Turkey. So Greece 2011, you're in St. Andrews Square. They held the tent camp. The people in the tent camp were using spontaneously, or rather not spontaneously, but because it's so easy to learn with modern technology, you just look at what people are doing and you go, that looks like this, is that true? And then somebody replies to you on the text, no, what we're really doing is this. So when the indignados in Spain held up that famous sign saying, shh, don't wake the Greeks, they're sleeping, within a week the Greeks had done an indignado camp. But what people didn't see was that also those camps were also set up in local areas of Athens as well. Who came to them? Obviously, autonomists. Okay? So the Greek radical left, this real radical left, is a lot of autonomist and anarchist activists. And it is large and it is subcultural. What does that mean? It means you could probably fill this room really easily if you said, hey guys, tonight we're having a showing of some weird black and white movie from May 68. and everybody would wear the same T-shirt, and everybody would have the same nose ring. And I'm not being stereotypical here, I am, but I mean it. There is a big left like that, which looking around the room, it is not so many people here are from that left, except you, of course. Okay, that's who was there, but then who came to it? Young mums. Young mums, just like we see in Focus East 15, they went, oh right, okay, yeah, I can't feed my kid, I hate this is terrible, I'm coming to this, and they'd turn up. Then of course, a lot of blokes would turn up, in old, grey hair and big, macho, whatever, and what was good was that horizontalism absorbed it all. So what I mean by horizontalism is the methodology of those activists, that it absorbed it, and they created this really annoying but quite amazing agora. So in the Greek classical tradition, the agora is the Greek parliament of ancient Greece, where the speakers are drawn by lots. If you ever want to observe the prior symptoms of cardiac arrest, watch somebody from the traditional left be given a chit and told you're on the back of the queue. I'm the leader of this, but no, you're not. You're at the back of the queue. And actually, no, tonight you don't get a chit. Sorry, this young woman gets a chit from thing and from some suburb. And yeah, what she says in particular, maybe not particularly erudite, but that's it. And so they would speak forever, and the agoras took place. Right, that's Greece. And then of course the police came in at the crucial moment where they were protesting against it. It became marches. Police bashed the whole thing up, smashed it up. Turkey. A year later, I think it is. 2 years later. So it flies by. So Turkey, obviously the same. It's a very similar start. So they occupy a space. The police break it up. The people who go, actually, at the start, are again quite similar, because the Turkish radical left is also quite autonomous, quite anarchist, quite black and red, and they go and do it. But they also, as always, this goes right back to, and we go right back to some of this, the black, pink and silver blocks of the anti-globalisation movement of 10, 15 years ago. You've always got black, pink and silver type people in these camps. But I got there on the third day of Gezi Park. And what was absolutely amazing, of course, was they are surrounded and completely marginalised by this huge swathe of what? Male football fans. In Gezi, on this vast platform, all you saw were young blokes basically taking off their shirts, their football shirts, and swapping. And it was an amazing event, and it kept going on. And of course, then they used the football thing, and then what else did you get? The other thing that struck me from the very beginning about Gezi was the female participation. Because this is, again, a weird thing. In Greece, all right, and you'll see this when we talk about Syriza. I mean, Syriza's leadership is quite male. There's one prominent female politician, Rina Duru, who's the equivalent of Boris Johnson now. She runs Attica. But all the others are men of my age and my kind of generation. And Greek, that's because the Greek left is kind of has always been quite patriarchal, right? Now, the Turkish left and Turkish society is also patriarchal, but remember what they're in revolt against: Islamism. The whole revolt is a revolt against conservative Islamist repressive government by the networked individuals. And so the women, obviously many of them also identify with this slightly problematic, well, very problematic political tradition in Turkey that is secularism or Kemalism, Ataturkism. So I don't want to give you a history lesson in Turkey, but there was a strong man in the 1920s who formed modern Turkey, and he secularised it. And his supporters, because the communist movement sort of supported him in that, his movement, Ataturkism, and all its progeny, use a lot of symbolism that's quite similar to communism, and therefore very secular. So, as well as the football fans, who by and large I would have said were secularist, Kemalist, leftist or nationalists. I should mention that these guys ran a military dictatorship in Turkey for 30 years. They're no angels, the Ataturkists. Okay? The women found a much more welcoming space in that movement, paradoxically, than even in Athens. And so the signal image of Gezi, to me, is women wearing things where you can see their midriff. That's the signal image of it. And then on the morning, so what is that? That's an in your face. That's a up yours, Delors, to Islamism. You know, and the other thing was they held a mass female yoga session. Right? You should have seen. I mean, you should have seen the press photographers. I mean, they just thought it was Christmas, but they're all, you know, mainly the press is quite conservative, Islamist, blah blah blah. You got suddenly. I mean, they mass 100 of them held this yoga session, and they all looked like Claudia Schiffer, and it was, you know, amazing. And that's what they did. So the difference is what I'm talking about. Well, I'm giving you examples because I want you to be there. It's my job as a journalist to take you there. And I didn't write about Turkey so much in the second version of the book. So what it did is, what you could tell then is that this was way deeper than Greece. The Greek, you know, masses had gone out and protested against austerity, but in a way, this kind of Islamist invasion of personal life. Just to recap, so the AK Party said, you know, its old deal was, we rule. The old military Kemalist rulers were corrupt. We rule, and we have a truce with secular society. But as Erdogan just got more and more crazy, I read this great article by a young fashion model, and what she said was, no, she's a fashion writer, but she probably looked like a fashion model. And what she said is, for the first time, people coming up to her and saying in the street, you can't wear that, you're not allowed to wear that top. Yeah, and she said that is what made me go to Gezi Park. It's just gone too far. So the depth of that. Now, why is it interesting to us? Because what you're finding is that what challenges austerity is one thing, economic crisis. But if something steps into your personal space and says you cannot live as you want to do, what you get is football fans swapping shirts. That's what you get, and that to me makes Turkey the model for what the 21st century revolution. I've gabbled, but that's my answer to you. Sorry.
There's two things that you've mentioned that I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit more about, namely, on the one hand, austerity and economic crisis, and the other, of course, Greece and Syriza.
Yeah.
Talk about how did Syriza win? Why did they win?
Okay.
And what can they do?
Right, okay, obviously people are very interested in this, and can I just recap what's happened?
Yes, yeah. Please do.
So what's happened last night is that, obviously they'd already on Thursday morning accepted that they weren't going to be able to. Syriza's strategy was to bump, I'll start with this, was to bump centrist Europe into the beginnings of rethinking austerity. That's what their strategy is. They can't survive in the euro unless the euro authorities can give them space to try and do an anti-austerity policy. And their strategy was, because they had support, explicit support from Matteo Renzi, the Italian Prime Minister, tacit support from Hollande, tacit support from certain people, including Draghi in the ECB, they thought they could do it. That's when people say, oh well, they lied and they said they could do this and they can't. No, they thought they would try, and what last night showed is that they failed. Right? So to stay in the euro, they had to step back, and they stepped back already on Thursday. They didn't step back any more last night than they had on Thursday. What that means is that the Germans' attempt to actually crush them failed, but the reason it failed was because the Greek Syriza leadership could see that the banks were going to close on Tuesday, and they only had till Tuesday. And because everybody knew that inside that room, for every hour they spent in the room, they would have given away more. So I'm not defending them, I'm simply explaining what they did. And that's what they did. So they stemmed the losses, and effectively it's a 4-month time out. We don't know what's going to happen. So let's roll back now and answer your question. Syriza. Okay, I think anybody who thinks, oh, let's all be like Syriza, is sadly kidding themselves, because Syriza and its victory is the product of very specific circumstances. And actually, the more engaged I am with it, the more I find out about it. Okay, so one, which I knew about because I've been engaged with Greece for decades, but let me say this, after they won, I got invited to people's houses, it's quite interesting because that's never happened before. People, activists, people I know, people I've interviewed, you come and meet my mum, come and meet my granddad. Okay, we did 2 or 3 nights in a row, and every time, all they talked about was what had happened in the Civil War, the resistance, and the dictatorship. Now, that's been going on around those dinner tables for 40 years or 70 years. So, for people who don't know, in the war, the Greeks defeated the Italians, so the Germans invaded, then they defeated the Germans on their own. Right? That's the first thing. And the communist-led resistance. It had problems, it was problematic resistance, but it did that. Right? They were talked into giving their arms up at the end of the resistance. The Brits went into Athens, shot a load of them, and imposed a right-wing Cold War government. Civil War for 2 years, where the left fought the right, lots of people tortured, lots of people executed, lots of people jailed, and of course their careers blighted forever, and their family name blighted forever. Right? Then, 60s and 70s, late 60s, early 70s, junta. So, what's happening throughout that entire period is that anybody vaguely left, anybody who might have even passed by here on the Bethnal Green Road and thought, oh, that looks interesting, is they don't get jobs, they don't get appointed to be TV correspondents, etc., etc., etc. And they're sitting there all the time saying, and they tortured my granddad, and they tortured my dad, and they won't, okay, that's big in Greece, right? And I'd say it's about 1/3 of society. And because the two ruling parties ruled for 40 years and divided power up between themselves, like here, when you go into the city of London, everybody in the city thinks the world is like Canary Wharf. They thought the world of Greece was like one of these kind of bazookia kind of bars where everybody's dancing around in hot pants. Yeah, that's what they thought the world was. And of course, what the first thing is then, it's not. So there's a massive leftism in Greece that I'm afraid there is not almost everywhere else. First question. Next thing. Social democracy destroyed itself. PASOK is a bit like Obama's Democrats and a bit like Labour. It's not really a social democracy, it's a mix between the Labour Party and the Democrats. It just destroyed itself. One after the other of its leaders signed up to an austerity that, in a coalition with the Conservatives, 25% of Greek society continually vote for harsh austerity. Harsh austerity, harsh policing, harsh, inhuman, anti-migrant policies. That's their constituency. They lost almost nobody throughout 5 years of austerity. PASOK lost all its voters. So, you know, when Ed Miliband and his team think about the PASOKization of Labour and the dangers of it, which I think they do worry about it, that's what it really is. Labour is by no means yet PASOKified, yeah, here. It means you become part of the elite, you can't see your own base, it just goes disappear. So, if there had been a social democratic, reforming, trendy, sort of beardy, hipster type social democrat party to replace it, fine, it would have grown. But of course, that was only formed in the last 10 months by people coming out of PASOK, and it's called the river, Topotami. I would imagine if many of you could go out onto Bethnal Green Road and say, let's form a party of people who like, you know, Brick Lane and Shoreditch, and they'd form Topotami. They wouldn't form Syriza, right? But because Syriza had been formed, it made it impossible for a kind of centre-left wing party to ever exist. Now, the next thing is Syriza. You have to say, whatever you think about them, they have shown amazing ability to survive the horizontalist era and maintain hierarchical structures. You know, the leadership is very deferential. It's amazing how traditional it works as a party. Tsipras, for now, is able to quell dissent in a way that Tony Cliff of the SWP could not quell dissent. You know, he has bigger hitting internal mechanisms than the SWP used to have when it was a big, you know, thriving organisation. So it works as a party. And then the other thing I would say is when history presented them the chance, they didn't blow it. They didn't do a bunch of crazy things. We could list them, but I don't want to embarrass the British left. The crazy, embarrassing things that the British left has done, they didn't do any of them. So, you know, they showed some restraint. So there's that. Then one more thing. In the middle of a crisis comes Golden Dawn. You know, it gets the fascist party, overtly fascist, beating people up, you know, infiltrating the cops, everybody can see that this is a real fascist party, and it goes from 4 to then 8, and then at its height it was polling 14 to 18%. Only the media groups that took the polls suppressed the polls. Because you don't want to, that would have, 18% would have, really, what would it have done, or what was it doing? The only fascist group in modern times, what was the problem with fascism in the 30s, is that the bourgeoisie, the big capitalists, went over to it in Italy, France and Spain. So Italy, Spain and Germany, actually even France as well, they tried to. So fascism as a movement gained mainstream support. That's what the Night of the Long Knives was, killing the radical, poor proletarian fascists so that the big capitalist fascists could take over the Nazi party or consolidate their control over it. Now, the only fascist movement in modern times that has that level of middle class and upper class support is Golden Dawn, except it's not public. But people could see it. One, they could see New Democracy as a party absorbing elements of people. There's a minister in the New Democracy government who'd been Golden Dawn's youth leader. He put away his axe that he was famously seen, attacking the left with. But and then what happens? They see the police encouraging the Golden Dawn. They see anti-fascist protesters captured by the police, photographs taken on police personnel's personal mobiles, and then racist, sexist, horrific sexual violence threats given to them in the cells, all accompanied by, "We are Golden Dawn, we are in charge now," from policemen. And so what happened there is that again, that middle area of radicalism, that I would imagine that might include some people in this room. You don't want to be in a far left party with a structure and a leader and all the rest of it. They go, sod this. This is going to be the Weimar Republic unless we do something, because there's no social democracy left. The police have gone fascist, and what do? And of course, out here are all the anarchist autonomes, chucking their bottles off the top of the buildings. We don't want to do that. So what do we do? Answer: Syriza. So that's my account of it.
So a lot of your work has been about trying to understand horizontalism, networks, these sorts of things. And what we see, obviously, Syriza, and you've given us an explanation of where they've come from, but also in Spain, the rise of another anti-austerity political party, Podemos. So how do we understand the rise not only of Syriza and its specificity in Greece, but also what's happening in Spain, and how is this coming out of, in the European context, also this networked, horizontal types of politics? How did the two sit together?
Let me answer that by just stepping back from that as a problematic to the wider issue. Because I think the wider issue in Europe is that the Eurozone doesn't work, and that you've got austerity imposed on the South. On top of, you've got austerity imposed on the working class of the whole continent. So the lowest wage growth is in Germany. The lowest wage growth. So the second lowest wage growth is in Germany, and the highest growth in inequality within the workforce is in Germany. So, this is not just a Southern European problem. And it's also, you see it in France, the stagnancy of the Eurozone's model for everybody except Germany, and anybody who can pin their flag to the mast of Germany, like northern Hungary, where all the factories now are, that Germany's opened up. Apart from that, and a few Scandinavian countries, apart from that, what the Eurozone is dictating what? Massive youth unemployment, places like France, Spain, Italy, massive youth unemployment. And then, immiserization for what I call like the traditional old working class. Now, in order to understand horizontalism, we have to understand what horizontalism answers and what it does not answer. And what it does not answer, and this is why I think anybody interested in radical solutions at the moment needs to think carefully about this. What it does not answer is a lot of questions for that old, often white, but not always, working class, which exists all over Europe, which is clinging on to what it's got, which is not mainly wages anymore, but services. At its worst, it sees those services as the only form of redistribution going on, and yet it can perceive those services, as it sees it, being used unfairly by recently arrived migrants. So if you think about it, there's a perfectly non-racist justification for saying, hold on a minute, we built this out of our taxes over generations, and then when you arrive you get the same as me, but there's a limited resource because of austerity, so we now get half each. Okay, who asked my permission for that? Is the inner thing that is driving something that I don't know what we're going to call it. Well, it goes from UKIP, it goes to the AFD in Germany, it goes to the Northern Leagues in Italy, and it certainly is what is lay behind Golden Dawn and the other right-wing parties, including this ANEL party in the Greek government. It's the failure of social democracy to deliver to the old working class. That is number one, right? And then failure of social democracy to deliver to the new people, to the networked people, to the what I'm talking about, the sort of educated youth, because they can't. Right, now, only if you say what I've just said, can you then understand, I would argue, what horizontalism is doing. Horizontalism is allowing those who want to fight back in a cheap and easy way. That's what it's doing. That's, in many ways, that's all it's doing. The other thing is that among young people, the kind of horizontalist mentality maps on very well, I've argued, and I argue in the book, to their work. Just as like to my dad and granddad's generation, their political consciousness as kind of quite right-wing Labour people, you know, Methodist-type Labour people. That's my dad's generation. But they, you know, they're not crossing a picket line of helping people even when you're starving, of sticking together, of the pride aspect of it, of the social cohesion aspect. That completely mapped onto their world of work. It wasn't because they'd read a lot of books by Nye Bevan, but that they worked together in the mine, and when they were in the war, fought together, you know, in World War I, more than World War II, in socially cohesive groups. Okay, that's that. Horizontalism maps onto a world where work asks us to be non-loyal, not loyal to the company, because I might move, and it might close down, or become a different thing, and sack me. Not loyal to my workmates, because we're all in individual contracts, so I want to get more money, I need to, you know, stab you in the back, you know, a bit, in a nice way. We still drink down the pub, we never talk about our wages. Meanwhile, modern society allows us all to, also to, work doesn't matter, doesn't care who you are. It's reduced to the very, a human being is reduced to a job function in modern society. That you've done, I know, and there is a school of sociology that studies extremely exploited people who are required to bring their personality into their work as of necessity, like people who are barristers who have to smile, or sex workers who do webcam work. That is called effective labour, and you've written a lot about it. But by and large, work doesn't ask us to bring anything about ourselves and doesn't care. And so, we can define ourselves. Work disciplined my granddad and dad's generation. I don't think my dad or granddad knew of anybody in their workplace who was gay, or if they did, nobody talked about it. And yet, you know, not only, I mean, especially in countries like Britain and America, not only can you be who you want to be, but there's almost like, you know, I used to be a teacher. I was a teacher when Section 28 was it called? Was in, yeah, and that was an issue for us. Clause 28, Section 28. My mate is a teacher now, who's a gay man. He had applied for this job and he says, I think I'm going to get this job because it says on their thing that they need to up their quota of gay men. In my lifetime, I never thought that would happen. So work has become neutral on who you are, and what that means then is that, well, again, being determines consciousness, what does it create? What does work create? It creates a kind of protester and resistor who is non-loyal, has weak ties, weak organisational ties, uses those weak organisational ties through networks to focus what is strong about individuals. I'd say the average individual in this room, especially those of you under the age of 30, are stronger and more rounded, probably more emotionally mature and more knowledgeable individuals by a factor, by like squared, to my dad and my granddad, who are lovely people, and not because of their ill education, but because as people they were not, they couldn't text anybody, they couldn't go on Tinder, you know, they couldn't do any of those things, and therefore their world was in a tramline forever. And your world is like an exploding network. And so now, all the 2011 shows, in 2011 was a few riots and a downfall of a regime and etc. And we could come to what happened since it, from the Arab Spring. I'm not talking about the Arab Spring at all. But insofar as those type of people were involved in Tahrir, and those type of people were involved in the start of the Syrian uprising, and are still involved in it, those type of people were a global class of new people who could use everything that we, my generation, thought was negative around this multiple, networked, non-loyal, weak ties type society, was for one moment turned into its opposite. It was turned into a strength. So that's that bit.
I mean, it's interesting you say that work doesn't care about you in the sense that you're neutral. But actually what work is asking us to do is to invest ourselves beyond the call of duty. And we have a generation of young people trying to do that, wanting to bring in their creativity, to do something with their lives, to realize themselves, but they're also being told there's no job. So have we had recovery?
Well, right,
What's going on? Let's bring the global economy into this.
That's my mastermind specialist subject. All right, Luke, this is what I think is happening with the global economy, and some of this analysis is contained in the book that I'm bringing out this year called Post-capitalism. And so it might be new to some of you because it goes beyond what I've written and what I do in my day job. It is this. Capitalism goes through long cycles in which at the end of them you often get a depression and a slump, but out of which you often get a huge technologically driven upsurge because the slumps wiped out all the old and inefficient technologies and business models, and the new technology has been stored up. And the typical pattern is when that new technology emerges, is that you get a higher growth, higher value, higher consumption, and higher well-being form of capitalism than you had during the Depression. So that's classically true of any of you in the room who were alive during the World War II. My mum was 5 when it started, so some of you might be that age. Will know that it went from, whoa, terrible, to an amazing world, right? That's what we call a technological paradigm shift. The 40s and 50s and 60s, an amazing upsurge. Productivity increased faster each year than wages. So basically you could have a wage rise and it would always be absorbed by rising productivity. So that went wrong, obviously, and we can talk about why. But my general thing about capitalism is that that's been its pattern. And it's the thing that always is thrown at Marxists about when they say, well, the profit declines and we got a crisis. Well, yeah, it does, but the point is that capitalism finds new ways of creating higher profit and therefore higher wage businesses until now. And I argue that information technology is a different type of technology to all the other technologies. And what information technology does is completely different. And what it does is it cheapens things on an exponential scale. If you drew the price of the silicon chips per inch or centimetre, or transistors per centimetre on a silicon chip, it's an exponential curve like that. The price is exponentially down, the number is exponentially up, and McKinsey argue this, that is not going to stop. Of course, you'll reach physical limits, like there are physical limits to how many transistors you can actually burn onto a silicon chip. There's 1 billion on the 1 centimetre chip that runs that. There's 1 billion transistors on it. Obviously, when the transistor was invented, there used to be switches that were 1 in 1947. So we're going through this amazing technological leap, which cannot, I argue, produce a high-value synthesis. It can't. And what it's doing, and you mentioned this as well, what it's doing is it's saying, right, look, we're on the verge of being able to automate the world. We're on the verge of being able to create an environment in which in developed countries a lot of work would not be necessary. But we haven't got the social structure to do that. We haven't got the societal means to do it, and therefore we fear it. David Graeber, the anthropologist, came up with this term, bullshit jobs. And I don't want to insult anybody who does one of these bullshit jobs. And in fact, there's a debate. Russell Brand is actually quite strong on this. Russell Brand argues that they're not bullshit jobs and that what we need to do is invest them with value. And of course, I would argue that that is possible. But if you analyse capitalism as it is, what it does is where it creates jobs that actually could be done by a machine. But it creates them because labour's so cheap and because we fear what would happen if the machines did the jobs. Now, there's a lot of technophobia as well in the world about machines. I am not technophobic. But I think, therefore, there's a famous study by the Oxford Martin School, came out in 2013, and they're doing more work on this, where they estimated 47% of all jobs in America could be automated in the next 20 years. What's going to stop that is the implicit knowledge that if we did that, there'd just be a revolution. Therefore, the reason I've started at this big picture, Emma, and we want to work down to it, to know the crisis, is because that is what I think is really going on. And it was only when I realised, or rather when I realised, whether it's right or not, when I came up with the thesis that this is true, was I able to fit the 2008 crisis into what's happening. Because 2008 happens because capitalism is the policy response to this low productivity, high technology, low wage world that I would argue is what capitalism is going to produce if we leave it alone. The policy response was endless credit expansion by the central banks, first of all America, then us, now Europe, Japan. Now after the crisis, the only golf club in the bag for anybody is endless expansion of money. But this already was what the new society was based on. Kostas Lapavitsas, who's a Soros professor of economics and now an MP for Syriza in a very rural part of northern Greece, argues that this kind of capitalism is called financialized capitalism. Not in the way that in the 1910s we thought of it as big banks, but in the financial exploitation inhabits us. We think as financially exploited beings. If I probably ask you what you're most worried about today, it's your mortgage and your credit card bill, not your wages. In that sense, we are being exploited through two streams. Obviously, the work we do, like in the old Karl Marx Das Kapital, and through a stream of profit that comes straight from everything we do into the financial world. Buy a pair of trainers on your credit card, profit for finance. Okay, go to college. Profit for finance. Join a gym. Somebody's already took those gym memberships, bundled them up into a financial instrument, sold them before you even thought about going to the gym to a capitalist, and you just slot in as gym member number 567, and your membership is going to pay interest into a financial instrument. Financialized capital. So the solution to the stagnation was what looked like an amazing thing. We got technological progress, massive boom, massive rise in consumption, coffee shops everywhere, everybody gets a bank account, everybody gets a mortgage, bang, end. It doesn't work. Now, what's the solution? Life support, quantitative easing, 7, 10, 12 trillion of extra money printed in the world, banks all effectively subsidised and restructured to be underpinned by the state, which is theoretically wrong according to neoliberalism, but now they are. So the banks are owned, owned and effectively controlled. The bond market doesn't exist. Bond market participants say to me, I came into this to be a capitalist. All I am, I'm running Gosplan for government. So Gosplan was the Russian planning ministry. All I am is a person moving around government ownership of bonds. It's unbelievable. So, right, so the recovery is simply fueled by extra money. It's not fueled by rising productivity. It's not fueled by rising wages. It's not fueled by a technological synthesis where a new kind of society, kind of new business models, come to rest on top of a rising technology. It's just life support. And therefore, now what does this mean? Best case scenario, you get a long period of life support. It can go on for quite a long time, 2050. Low. So what happens if that happens is that the crisis dynamic comes from apparently from outside economics, so demographics. Okay, we all get older. The tax-paying population can no longer pay for anything: welfare, healthcare, elderly services, social care, and the state collapses. So S&P estimates that 60% of all countries will be insolvent in 50 years' time because of that, right? But that's only a product of having a low-growth capitalism. If you had a high-growth capitalism, that wouldn't be true. So that's one scenario. But the other scenario is that the exit route, what we've got so far is globalization being kept alive by downward pressure on wages and endless credit expansion. And the real austerity is not state austerity, fiscal austerity. It's not states cutting back. That's austerity. The real austerity, as said by Tidjane Thiam, the boss of Prudential at the Davos conference 2 years ago, is that the wages of the first world have to fall to the level of the wages of the third world, and they will meet each other. The billion-strong rising Asian middle class will meet you halfway up. That's it. Interesting. That was one of Syriza's strongest messages in Greece, actually. That they want us to become like the Chinese was one thing that played there. Now, so I think that's the worst case scenario. And in that scenario, what will then happen is that, first of all, the vanguard of it will be the usual people who don't like, the usual foot soldiers of the far right, the small shopkeeper who thinks that everything's wrong with the world, and Daily Mail reader, you met them, yeah. But the vanguard will be that. But then the real danger is that that old traditional working class, if social democracy no longer can deliver to it, will say, you know what, we've had enough of globalization. If globalization means endless migration into our services, and it means endless downward pressure on our wages, and this other country's getting rich on our back, that's the end of globalization. What will happen then is a series of parties will come to power that are non-traditional right-wing parties that blow globalization apart. I think that's my worst case scenario exit route from the crisis.
Right, well, it's not just people that are posing a limit to globalization. Obviously, one of the other limits to our economic model is climate change and environmental degradation. So it seems to me that there are different limits being put to this. If capital can't find value, it's also our planet is saying it can't continue like this. I mean, I don't know if we have to discuss climate change now. Maybe we can wrap it into our further discussion, because I would like to bring you all into the conversation.
I'm sorry for rabbiting. You're very good at getting me to just rabbit on, but yeah, climate change. We can just. People always say to me, actually, when you're writing the books, why don't you write about climate change? Because for many people, it is the most important thing. Now, in the post-capitalism book, what I've done is in the book, what I'm trying to do, the one that's coming out in August, is to say, well, okay, well, what do we do about that? And what I argue is that the synthesis is you have a technological transition to a low work economy where work and leisure are blurred, and we manage our way towards that. Probably need some basic income is a starting point. It doesn't solve anything, but something like the basic income gets you is a subsidy for that transition rather than a kind of a good idea to alleviate poverty. But then, you restructure. There is this massive task in the world, ecological sustainability, and there's massive technologies that actually can do it. I think there are technologies that could, if we deployed them, probably allow us to put the brakes on global warming. And therefore, let's do them. But the kind of society you need to do it is different. And what I've seen, and many people in this room of my age will have also seen, is that the left, or let's not even call it the left, the socially progressive part of society has gone now for 30 years without any model about what it wants to replace this with. And therefore, what I thought was the most important thing to do was to try and brainstorm that model, that top-down model. And I mean top-down because, of course, peer-to-peer networks and horizontal businesses and non-managed spaces will be the meat and drink of this revolution, this economic revolution that I talk about. But if you go back to how capitalism became capitalism from about 1800 to about 1830, what had to change was the regulation of society. So the central bank, only the central bank can issue money. Children are not allowed to work in factories. towns must have drains. You know, all capitalists resisted all these things. No, we want to print our own money. We want children. They're good. We don't need drains. Just throw it out in the front. No, you know, the state had to say, no, actually, this isn't working. For capitalism really to take off, you're going to need drains, street lighting, hospitals, schools. No, what the modern equivalent is not that, actually, because they already exist. What the modern equivalent is a regulatory framework that allows us to do this technological revolution, low work, and new kinds of horizontal businesses. You could say, you know, the only startups that get funding from the local enterprise partnership will be self-managed cooperatives. You know, why don't we say that? Because all that gets startups are like I call them whiteboard businesses. You know, you can't get a grant from the local council for setting up a plumbing business, but you can get a grant from the local council for setting up a business to train people how to apply to become a plumber. It's great, but
and an app.
Yeah, an app, yeah. But why don't we? When I say change of regulation, that's all I mean. If you just, it comes free. Actually, it's free. It costs you nothing. Anyway, let's go back to
let's brainstorm. Let's talk about
brainstorm.
let's talk about where we're going to go.